From LinkedIn News, I'm Leah Smart, host of Everyday Better, an award-winning podcast dedicated to personal development. Join me every week for captivating stories and research to find more fulfillment in your work and personal life. Listen to Everyday Better on the LinkedIn Podcast Network, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts.
From LinkedIn News, I'm Jessie Hempel, host of the Hello Monday podcast. Start your week with the Hello Monday podcast. We'll navigate career pivots. We'll learn where happiness fits in. Listen to Hello Monday with me, Jessie Hempel, on the LinkedIn Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
I have some incredible news. My second book, How to Have Difficult Conversations About Race, is now the #1 new release in its category on Amazon. I'm so excited for this because we've put a lot of work into it, and this was risky because as a lawyer who's focusing on negotiation and conflict resolution, talking about race seems for many to be outside of the scope of what I usually do. But again, how are we defining negotiation? We define negotiation as any time you're having a conversation and somebody in the conversation wants something. And as the podcast is titled, Negotiate Anything, we can negotiate anything. And in my years of doing all of this work in the professional world, difficult conversations about race is something that comes up over and over and over again in the workplace. And there isn't really a solid resource out there that blends the fundamentals of negotiation and conflict resolution and effective communication with this particular topic. So it's risky. It is risky to venture in this way, but I'm really excited and encouraged by this early result. So this is not just a win for me, this is a win for you too, because you are part of this tribe. And so a quick note about the book. Who did I write this for? I wrote this for the person who is passionate about changing the world and their organizations for the better, the leader who leads a diverse team, and the professional who wants to learn how to overcome the hidden barriers that make it tough to connect with people with a different background. So whether you consider yourself an ally or just want to avoid making a critical mistake when discussing race, this book is for you. And for you as a podcast listener, I'm making a direct request. After 6 years and over 600 episodes of Negotiate Anything, I'm asking for your support in this endeavor to make the world a better place. Our goal of the American Negotiation Institute is to change the world, and this book plays a critical role in making that happen, and we would love to have your support. We have the links in the description of this episode so you can get your copy of How to Have Difficult Conversations About Race. Hello, my friends, and welcome to another exciting episode of Negotiate Anything. This show is produced by the American Negotiation Institute, and with over 5 million downloads and listeners in over 180 countries, listeners just like you have made this the #1 negotiation podcast in the world. Hi, my name is Kwame Christian, and I am the founder and CEO of the American Negotiation Institute. Here at ANI, we believe that the best things in life are on the other side of difficult conversations, and we are passionate about providing you with the best content that will help you to make your difficult conversations easier, both at work and at home. Lastly, I want to remind you that we offer consulting and conduct trainings, both virtually and in person, all around the world. Our focus is in 3 main areas. First, negotiation and conflict resolution. Second, leadership. And lastly, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Check the link in the description below to learn more about how we could work with you and your team. And now, without further ado, let's jump into the interview. Leah, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, no, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah, it is my pleasure, my friend. So how about you get us started by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Sure. So my name is Leah Wilson. I'm editor-in-chief at BenBella Books. We're a mid-sized independent publisher based out of Dallas, Texas. We've got folks all over. So I oversee our editorial department. I do some acquisitions and generally make sure that the books get edited to our standard and that we have a good relationship with our authors.
This is great. Speaking of good relationships with your authors, who is your favorite author to work with? I
don't know if you've heard of him. I think he's a big guy in certain spaces. His name's Kwame Christian. Does that ring any bells for you at all?
Kwame, I've never heard of Kwame. I've heard of this Kwame Christian guy. No, this is great. So pumped to have you on the show. So yes, everybody, Leah is my editor in chief. And she had the sometimes misfortunes, that's fortune of working with me for the past couple of years. It's been a lot of fun, and I'm really excited about this because I don't think people really think about the relationships that an editor and editor-in-chief would have with their authors as like a negotiation. They don't think about the difficult conversations that actually lead to the successful creation of these books. So how about you just kind of set the stage by telling people about what it is that you do day to day and then how you interact with the authors?
Yeah, I mean, what I do day to day. I mean, that's a tough one. In terms of kind of interaction with authors, I mean, I think, like you said, I think there is a lot of negotiation when it comes to the editorial process, because the whole point of editorial is, you are working with the author towards a shared goal, and you have to figure out what is the best way to get to that goal, and make sure that any disagreements you have about what's going to best serve the book, what's the best way to produce the best book possible. You have to make sure that those are kind of navigated in a way that leaves everybody both happy with the outcome, but also happy with the process you took to get there. So there's no hard feelings at the end also.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, that's really well said. And I think it sounds really easy on the surface, right? But then when you get into the process behind the scenes, that's where it can become challenging, right? So can you tell us a bit about some of the things that might make accomplishing that goal you described difficult?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, authors are unsurprisingly very close to their books, right? They've spent months, years. I know I had one author who had spent a decade researching and putting together her book. And so when they pass that manuscript off to you, that's like handing over their baby, that's handing over their life. And so when you then have to come back and tell them, hey, you've done a lot of great stuff here, but I think I have some ways that it can be done better, or this really isn't working, or, we have talked together about what your goals are, and this part of the book isn't helping you meet them. That can be a lot. That can be really, really emotional. And I think that is the thing that I always try to keep in mind in any conversation and any feedback I give any author. Just kind of making sure that I am taking that into account when I'm thinking about how I communicate with them. And that, I am, when authors do come back feeling a little, potentially a little defensive, especially if I haven't done a good enough job, in kind of my communications, making sure that I am hearing them and validating those feelings, and making sure that they feel heard and respected in a way that can let us then go, okay, I hear that maybe I didn't, communicate that in the best way. Let's talk it through. Let's figure out, kind of where we are disagreeing, and let's find a solution to the problem. Let's find, let's agree that it is a problem, first of all, but then find a solution to that problem that's gonna work for both of us, and we're both going to be really happy with at the end. Which again, it's not always easy as that, but it is. That's the goal.
This is great, and for me, it's fascinating from the author side to see it from your perspective too. This helps me in my process of being more empathetic too, to see how it could feel on your end. And I realized that I didn't do a good job of setting the stage too, because I said, yes, we're working together. I'm one of your authors, but I never said the name of the book. I can't just assume that everybody listening to the pod knows the book.
That's a good point.
Yes. And so my first book was self-published, Finding Confidence in Conflict. My second book, working with Leah and her team, is How to Have Difficult Conversations with Your Editor-in-Chief. That's the name of that book. No, it's How to Have Difficult Conversations About Race, coming out September 13th. And we'll put links in the description so you could pre-order it. That would be really helpful if we can get pre-orders. That's, just let me put that out there and make that request. You'll probably hear me say that 93 more times over the course of this interview. But yes, I really liked what you said about the conversations you have with authors where you have to take really their baby and let them know, hey, there are some tweaks that you need to make to this. And one of the things that you said you run into a lot is defensiveness, which makes sense. Because when you think about the term defensive, right, the root word is defense. And so whenever somebody's feeling defensive, whenever they get defensive, that means that there's something that's important to them that they feel is being attacked. And even if you are supremely respectful and mindful of the way that you approach your feedback, it doesn't mean that the other person will not get defensive in how they respond to that. And so you have a lot of experience in this field, so you've seen that before. How do you work around that defensiveness?
I mean, I think there are two techniques, two tactics. I think one, first of all, is to try to give them some space to start out with. I think I learned early on that if someone, because a lot of this starts over written communication, because we put together an official editorial letter. It's something that they can have in writing and reference back and forth. I usually send that and say, hey, let's set up a call. But if they're having an initial response that is really strong, they're like, can we set up a call right this afternoon? I usually try to push that at least a day, give them a chance to take a deep breath, read it through. And so if there's an initial really strong reaction, they can sit with it for a while and see, is that the reaction that they want to be having? And I feel like that alone helps a lot, because then they're coming in with a more a more level head, more even tempered. They're going to be better able to communicate to me what the problem is and what they see is wrong with what I said. And it makes it easier for us to work together collaboratively to find a solution. Because often, if you talk to them right away, sometimes, they're upset. They might say something that triggers you and you get upset, and it just kind of spirals instead of being a really productive conversation. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is getting on that phone and being able to talk directly and be able to hear intonation and be able to respond, immediately. Because I think while time does for all of us, it lets us kind of cool off. It can also let us spiral, right? So we are imagining what the other person is thinking. We're imagining in our heads, what the other person's motivations were, which reminds me of something that I know really resonated from your book that I want to talk about in a minute. But so that time can also work against you. And so being able to connect after that and get back together and talk it through, I think is equally crucial in kind of getting past that defensiveness.
This is really, really good. So let's break this down. So step one to overcome that defensiveness is giving them the space that they need. And step two is actually having the conversation and talking it out. And so when you think about the science of sleep, one of the things that's really interesting about it is that the term sleep on it exists in essentially every culture, every language. That it's really interesting, right? And so what they found is that every night it's kind of like a therapy session that happens during the REM portion of sleep, rapid eye movement. And so that's why a lot of times you might go to sleep really, really emotional, but typically you don't wake up with the same level of emotionality. Nothing changed in your circumstances, but what changed was just psychologically underneath the surface, your brain is processing and you're cooling down. Now, even though there's a term for sleep on it in every language, and we recognize that helps with emotion management, we also realize that not all colloquialisms make sense, because time heals all wounds. My wife's a doctor. That's not how time works. So even though sleep can do a little bit of work for us, it doesn't do everything for us. So then you actually have to have that conversation, because it can help with that emotional processing, but it doesn't do everything. So you have that conversation. And I think it's really important for the listeners to realize that you said, yeah, I didn't have like an endless email chain going back and forth. When you realize that it's a highly emotional type of conversation, once you get that sense, you're saying, nope, this needs to be a phone call. And you talked about listening to the tone and hearing. And so I think this is a really, really strong approach for handling those difficult emotions that will come.
It feels good to have a professional, kind of to vet my my approach. Makes me feel like I'm doing something right.
Yes, you're doing a lot of things right. And again, listeners, as that, author who is very proud of the work that he does, who thought that the work was done after he submitted his manuscript. I could tell you that Leah is very, 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 very good at this. And I think it's something else to give some context, some behind the scenes type of stuff. Authors think very highly of themselves a lot of times too. So it's not just that they like their work, but they also think that they're exceptionally good and don't need feedback a lot of times. And so to give an example of where my head was at when I agreed to this journey, the due date was June 13th, right, Leah? That was the due date for the manuscript. That was also the due date for my second son. And I said, I got this.
Right.
Unwise, right? And so, but I said, it's okay, I'll get this done and we'll be done with the process. And I was surprised every time we had another editing call or request for revisions. I was like, but the first version was so good. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't.
I think the thing with, you're an author, you're working on your own, we want you to turn in what you think is the best possible version. But, anytime someone else reads it, you're going to get a different perspective on what's going on. And I should take a moment actually to give a shout out to my co-editor on this, Alan Wallace, because I want to make sure that she gets credit for all of the excellent work that she did kind of supporting that editing process. But yeah, it was another, I think, 6 months before we finally got that to the copy editor after that June due date. So yeah, it's a lot of back and forth, but it's, oftentimes there's more, I like to say there's more back and forth when a book is good to begin with, right? Like you don't spend a lot of time polishing up something that doesn't have a ton of potential and that you don't see, and you see, this is something, this is going to be an important book. So let's put in the extra time. So if that gives you any solace for the amount of time that we worked on it after that initial submission, hopefully will.
It does. It really does. It's helpful. Good. And I think also there's something I actually mentioned in the book is the concept of the curse of knowledge, where you're so familiar with something that you forget what it feels like to not know that thing. And then when it comes to explaining that thing, you miss some of the basic things in that explanation. And it's funny, here's a moment of self-awareness where I talk about that concept as that being a barrier in the persuasive process, in these difficult conversations where you think you're explaining something well and you're not. And that is exactly what was happening a lot of times with the concepts that I was putting forth. It was really interesting to think. For me, I was saying, all right, steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then in my head, I already understood the gap between 1 and 2, and it seemed obvious to me. But then for you and Alan, as you were going through, you're like, 1 and 2 don't connect. There are 3 steps that are in your head that that you're assuming everybody else knows that they don't know. And it was just really eye-opening to go through that process, because it helped me to understand myself and my own concepts a lot better too. Does your company invest in professional development training? If you believe that your team would benefit from a negotiation workshop, all you need to do is go to our website, fill out the workshop request form, and then we'll set up a time to chat. These workshops are completely customizable, and we've done them all around the country. Negotiation and conflict resolution skills are beneficial across all professions, but they're especially useful in procurement, purchasing, sales, sourcing, and contract management. Our calendar is filling up quickly, and we even have some workshops scheduled for next year. If you think you might want one, I'd suggest reaching out soon so you don't miss out. Check out the link in the description to learn more, and we will be right back after this.
Hey you, I'm Andrew Seaman. Do you want a new job? Or do you want to move forward in your career? Well, you should listen to my weekly show called Get Hired with Andrew Seaman. We talk about it all, and it's waiting for you, yes you, wherever you get your podcasts.
Brace the rudders! Raise the sails! Raise the sails!
Captain, an unidentified ship is approaching. Over.
Roger. Wait, is that an enterprise sales solution?
Reach sales professionals, not professional sailors. With LinkedIn ads, you can target the right people by industry, job title, and more. We'll even give you a $100 credit on your next campaign. Get started today at linkedin.com/marketer. Terms and conditions apply.
Yeah, I definitely think that is a huge chunk of what the job of editing is, right? Is going in and teasing out those kind of things that authors, especially authors who are experts in their field, like you are, who can have that curse of knowledge going in and teasing out, like, hey, can you tell us a little bit more here? This is not quite clear yet to me as a lay reader. Can you tell me a little bit more? And I feel like that is if I had to make a kind of pie chart of editing, I would say maybe a solid fifth to a fourth, if not more, of the editorial work is just kind of, filling those gaps, crossing those divides.
That's great. And again, this is very good for me to know too. So I don't feel like it was. It is
not just you. No. Yeah. Not at all.
This is great. This is great. So tell us something else about the process when it comes to interacting with authors, because again, people read books. They don't always think about the process behind the scenes. So what else have you learned through these interactions?
Man, so, we talked a little bit about communicating with authors, first when their manuscript comes in and putting together an editorial letter and kind of sending that to them and kind of laying out the big picture. But I think there is a lot of back and forth all through the process that people don't think about, and a lot of back and forth that is, I think, aimed at one of the concepts that really resonated for me from, working on your book was the idea of collaborative problem solving. I do that in those editorial letters. Here's the problem I see. Here's why I think it's a problem. Here's a couple of solutions from my end. But give me your thoughts. How, do you agree it's a problem? How do you think we should solve it? Sometimes the author uses my solution. Sometimes they come up with their own, which is often way better. And that's my preference. That's awesome. That's why I give the problem, because the person I'm talking to is an expert on their book. They're an expert on what they're talking about. They're going to know even better than I am what's going to work. But I also do that on the line level. So all the way through, which I know you are very familiar with, the idea that, we've got a manuscript and it gets marked up, and that, any problem I spot on a line level, I embed a comment. It does follows that exact same formula. It's just, hey, here's the problem I see. Here's a solution I can think of, but making sure that I'm leaving room for the author to come up with a better one too. But it can be a lot of back and forth to kind of make sure everything is really, really clear. And really communicated to the best of, to take the author's ideas and make sure that they are as clear and as, masterfully communicated as we can possibly get them to be. It is a lot of back and forth and a lot of collaboration.
Yes, a lot of it. And and again, let's break it down for the listeners too, so they can actually see what this looks like. And tell me if this is hyperbole. Call me out if I'm speaking too grandiosely about this. So, listeners, so let's imagine a chapter of a book, right? Chapter is long. Let's put it at like 20-ish pages. And so then I get the chapter back, and like the first time around, it has like literally thousands of edits, like thousands of them. And so because there are going to be some edits that are pretty simple, like, oh, we should make this a capital or some punctuation or something that you all could go in and do. And then there are going to be some where it's like, doesn't make sense. Clarify this. What does that mean? And so it can be really, really overwhelming as an author. And remember, there's several iterations. So we graduate from the first one, which is it's thousands of edits, and then in a chapter. And then the next one, we graduate to hundreds of edits, like and it's like a never-ending process. So a lot of times, let me assume, or maybe it's just me. It could be overwhelming. So hypothetically, if other authors are overwhelmed when they're confronted with thousands of edits
I know.
on what they thought was already really great, how do you manage that shock and overwhelm?
I mean, it can be very surprising, and it can, sometimes depending on how many edits I know they're going to be, I'll break it up into stages. So I'll do a pass where like I just do the bigger picture ones. Then I do a separate pass where it's like the smaller stuff. I think with yours, I threw everything at you all at once. So you had both those kind of, we did both the high level and the kind of like, hey, can we shift, can we put a comma here? I hope that for a single chapter, it was not thousands, but hundreds feels very, very easy to believe for sure. And I would not want to make a bet on you being wrong. So I will not put money down on that. But so that, and I think too, the fundamental thing, because can be a hard process. So the fundamental thing is really making sure that you are on the same page in terms of what, your goals, in terms of, that you both want to produce the most successful book you possibly can, and to make sure that you trust that the other person wants that too. Easy to trust the author that they want that, but I think it can be more difficult for authors to trust that their editor and their publisher want that too. You hope that that's why they signed on, right? That you had, when you and our publisher Glenn first talked, hopefully what you came away from that with was the idea that I trust what this guy's saying. I trust he's going to do the best he can by my book. I trust they're going to help me sell this and get this out. Money aside, money's important, but that feeling of trust, I think, is really, really crucial. BenBella, we put kind of front and center a partnership philosophy, which I think is one of the things that really makes us unique amongst publishers. We really emphasize the importance of working together with the author, kind of top to bottom. So making sure our authors are involved, obviously in editorial, but in cover, in the marketing plan, in, what paper we choose, if that's something that they're interested in being a part of. I think all of that and all that focus on partnership and all the things we put in process-wise to focus on partnership, it's all about building that trust. And it's all about making sure that our authors know that we're in it with them. And that when we do offer, information that might make arguments counter to what they believed, or when we do say, hey, I think we should rewrite this chapter, that they know that the place that it's coming from, that it's coming from a place of respect and a place of trust and a place of, those shared goals that I know you talk about a lot in the book.
Yes, no, this is really great. And I think just summarizing this, listeners, first of all, we saw that Leah agreed with me. There were millions of edits every chapter, millions now. And I also want to talk about the trust element, because that's big. That's really big, because again, people are really attached to their ideas, and not just their ideas in general, but in particular, the way that their ideas have been articulated. And so think about, for me too, a lot of this comes from actual interactions that I've had with people, one-on-one, or in coaching sessions with clients, or in trainings and presentations. And so there is when you think about confirmation bias, another thing that's talked about in the book, what's interesting is that the more you go over something and the more you say something, the more accurate it becomes, not in reality, but the more accurate it feels. And so for a lot of authors, I know for me, I've been teaching in a specific way, in a specific order, with a specific flow. And then to hear, oh, it's actually better this way, there's a bit of a record scratch moment too. But you have to trust the process and trust the people. And you touched on how you start to build that trust, but let's go a little bit deeper on what that looks like.
Sure. So, trust is, trust is built interaction by interaction, right? It's trust. Trust is built through every moment where you do have a disagreement and how you handle that. Because as a publisher, we aim to be very communicative and get authors involved, with every step of the process. We have more disagreements. We have more moments where, we think one thing is best and our author might think the other thing is best, and where we get a chance to talk those out. And I think with each successful conversation, with each time we resolve a difference, in a way that's respectful, in a way that, takes both sides' expertise and both sides' knowledge into account, trust builds. And so, hopefully that even if one interaction doesn't go the way we might want, hopefully we have so many of them that if something does go wrong, we have that trust built up behind, and then we can kind of continue to build it going forward.
Yeah, I think that's great. You're absolutely right. And one of the things you talked about was disagreements and how they are essentially inevitable in this process. I tell people there's a simple equation for how you can determine when a conflict is going to happen. So what you do is you see there's like one person, and then there's another person. That's the extent of the analysis. It's as long as you have people, there are going to be disagreements. That's just how humanity works. But something I talked about in the book, something I talk about in the podcast and on all the trainings all the time, is that conflict is an opportunity. And I can talk about the fact that a lot of times we might not have always agreed on like the exact way things should be done, but I think we both learned through the process. I mean, because I'm thinking I was actually, as you were answering it, and there's probably some technology that could allow us to do this. This would be an interesting experiment. If we were to take the initial manuscript that was submitted and then compare it to the actual finished product, what percentage would be the same? I would think it would be like 25% or something. It'd be pretty minor. I don't know. There were a lot of changes that were good and very necessary.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that for sure. I think, even because I've had editorial processes with authors that have been a little tough before, but it's important. Like at the end, I want the author to be like, yeah, our publisher had a check-in call that we do afterwards with a set of authors who, one of my favorite books I've ever worked on, where I actually told them to rewrite. I asked them, I was like, I think, look, this is great. It's really well written. The stories you have here are great. I think you need to rewrite the entire thing. I don't think we really wanted to highlight these awesome principles for, in this case, it was raising successful, fulfilled kids. That this is what was really special about the book, that this was this research that they'd done and these principles that they had isolated. And I was like, this book is great, but it doesn't do a very good job of highlighting those. They get buried. They get totally hidden. And as you might imagine, they were not really excited about me telling them that I thought that they actually needed to do an entire rewrite. But they had the same goal, right? They agreed, we wanted those principles to come through as clearly as possible. But I was, and I think I'd worked with one of the authors before, lots of good trust, process went, but I think it was tough. I mean, I think it went well. I was thrilled with the book that came out. They seemed very, after they kind of were like, all right, we're not happy about this, but we're going to try rewriting it. They seemed happy with it. The most important thing to me was when we did our check-in call, a few months after publication, is that they were able to say, we didn't always agree with Leah, but and she worked with us and, we didn't always take her recommendations. We found other solutions, but we're really happy with how it came out. We really value the process. We were really happy with the end result. And I think that is, that's the thing that I am always looking for, even if there's a little bit of difficulty, as long as we're still respecting and trusting each other through the process. And in the end, everybody is happy. I think that is what I was looking for. What's actually very interesting about that book is one of those principles that they distilled. It's something called the book is called The Formula. It's 8 roles that the research suggests that parents of successful children take on. But one of those roles is the negotiator, which I thought of. So I thought of that a lot while I was working on your book. It's about, teaching kids when and how to push for what they want and how to kind of do that effectively.
That is great. Yeah. So I think I have another podcast guest. I'll reach out to that person too. That's really great. So a couple of key takeaways here. So first of all, I need to count my blessings that I did not have to rewrite my book because I would have instantly died if that was the suggestion. Go ahead. See,
all of that was to say that I guess to put in perspective the change. So because we did tweak a lot of things. We moved location for a lot of things. We pushed for more details, but the bones and the principles and everything were there from the beginning. We just kind of slotted them into some different spots, which I will say, I think that's a thing that happens a lot with people who speak, and you do a lot of speaking for a living, is that sometimes things that work really well in speak, when you're giving speaks and you're talking to people directly, don't necessarily translate exactly the same way when you're writing them, in a book. And so that's kind of part of the editorial process too, is figuring out, okay, what's still working? What might we need to tweak given this different medium?
Yeah, this is actually good because I think this is would be, this is really helpful for me to understand too, because the way that you speak, you could convey a message. Speaking it is very different from the way you convey that exact same message writing it. And so again, as a professional speaker, that's how I process things. And then I think I'm pretty sure I told you my process for writing. It's just going on long walks with a question in my mind and a topic, and then I just ramble. And then it's it is the unfortunate responsibility of my team and some outside consultants to take that incoherent gibberish and put it into something that is, organized somewhat. And that helps me to understand too why there were those moments where there was a bit of a disconnect between ideas that worked really well in presentations, like a keynote or something like that, where the connection didn't need to be as tight. But then when you come to writing, it really needs to be teased out really methodically in order for the person to have a good reading experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, this is fascinating. This is really, really fascinating. And so when you think about this collaborative process, because it's not just you and the author, we were working with Alan too, who did a lot of the editing process. Shout out to Alan. She's the person who got me interested in K-pop, which was my my shining light that kept me going through this process, where I could listen to good music that I didn't understand, so it wasn't distracting. So that was beautiful. I appreciate that. But internally, I'm sure there are going to be times where you might think something needs to be done one way, and then somebody else on your team thinks it needs to be done another way. And then we have the copy editor who wants to format something potentially differently. So how do you reconcile those differences internally within the BenBella team?
Yeah, I mean, part of the way that works is, we each have our own specialties, right? And so I can question and argue, what we're doing with the cover and offer my 2 cents and make an argument about something. But when I do that, I have to keep in mind, this is our director, Sarah's area. This is what she knows. This is her job. My job is to, kind of poke her if I think she's making a mistake, but she's the one who has that ultimate decision-making power. Right. So, but I also trust that, if I put up a huge fuss about a cover direction that we're going, that she'll take that seriously, right? That she won't just be like, well, this is my choice and I disagree. If I'm really, really making a fuss about it, she will, she'll like, okay, let's get on the phone. Let's talk it through. Let's figure out, how to do that. But I think, it's the same way we work it with our authors in the area and where it's an area of their expertise. If I were to have come to you with a change and been like, hey, I think we should do it this way. And you're like, no, that doesn't make any sense because that's not how negotiation works. That's a change we shouldn't make. And I'd be like, you know what? You know this better than I do. You're right. Let's figure out, kind of some other, either I need to give, which I'm happy to do, or, we need to find some other way to figure out how to make my problem less of a problem. So I think it's the same thing. I mean, internally, we want to kind of keep that. We try not to voice that too much in front of the authors. But sometimes we do, because we want them to see both sides too, because they're going to have a valuable, opinion, and what both sides are saying may inform them or may kind of spark something for them that kind of provides a third way, or, lets them offer their expertise about which way they think that things should go. So it is a constantly moving process. But luckily, I mean, I love the people I work with. I think it's such a great company and such a great group of people. And so that definitely makes it easier too. And we've had most of them working there a long time. So like I have been working with Sarah for more than 7 years, close to 10. Our marketing director, your marketer, Jennifer Canzanieri, I've been working with for more than 15 years. And so that helps too, those kind of long-term ties. Again, we were talking earlier about building trust over time and over interactions. And I think that is, kind of an important element too.
Absolutely. The more trust you have, the more tolerant the relationship will be in the face of conflicts. And like we said, conflicts are inevitable. So it takes time, but it's important time to build that trust with the people that you're working with. That's really good to know. Really, really helpful. And as you were talking, I was thinking about the times where there was, I would say, some small c conflict in our approaches. And I think it was mainly internal conflict because I'm like, oh, I know that she's right, but can I convince her not to make me do this? But there was one time, because I think, and you correct me if I'm wrong, because I might be romanticizing this in my favor, but I think there was only one time where I disagreed with one of the call outs. I think every other time I added or edited when you suggested it. First of all, before we reveal what that was, am I remembering that right?
I mean, I think there were a few, but if I'm thinking of the same one that you are, then yeah, I think you are remembering that right. Because I will say that I feel like, I want the people I'm working with, the authors I'm working with, obviously I want them to agree with my comments, but if they agree with all of my comments, either they're not doing their job, pushing back where they should be pushing back, or I'm not doing my job, I'm not pushing hard enough. So if I don't get any pushback on my edits, I see that actually as a problem. Like that means something has broken down in the process. So definitely, I think there are places where you push back and, in a warranted way, either on the solution or on the problem in general. But you talk about the one that you're remembering. I'm curious to hear if it's the same one I am.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the one in the conclusion.
So the conclusion, or because I'm thinking of the way we handled the appendix, where we're doing the kind of frequent conversations you might end up having about race. Right. And I was like, I think we need, it's now been like 7 months since I last kind of looked in depth at those edits. I was like, I think we need a little bit more kind of preamble before that. And you're like, and when I looked back, I was like, no, he's right. He's right. We don't need the preamble. I'm glad he pushed back on that. So that's the one that I was remembering. But tell me about the conclusion one.
That's really funny because I think my brain blocked out some of these ones because when you talked about the appendix, I forgot that there was an appendix until you said that. And when you started describing it, I was like, yeah, this was Kwame tapping out.
It's a great appendix. Like, I think it's such a useful kind of way to see your negotiation principles in practice and kind of get more context on that. Sorry, I will stop selling the book. Talk to me about the conclusion thing.
Keep selling the book. Listeners, buy the book. There's a link in the description of this episode. But the point that I was thinking about was the in the conclusion, and I believe I said it this way, because the way that I wrote the book is that I want it to be something that anybody can pick up and use. So I think the description that we had with our with my agent is like, all right, somebody goes to school, takes a lot of classes. Now they're woke and now they think their parents are racist. And so they could pick up this book, learn how to have that conversation. And then a parent could say, my kid went to school and now they're woke and they said I'm racist. How do I have that conversation with them? Right? So anybody who happens to find themselves in a difficult conversation about race, whether they want to be in the conversation or not, because I think a lot of leaders find themselves unexpectedly in the conversation. I want you to be able to find value in this book, whether you're trying to persuade people or just trying to escape conversations respectfully. I want people to be able to use the book. And so there was a part in the conclusion where I think the feedback was, and you correct me if I'm wrong, where you said the book throughout has been really approachable and really inviting, pretty light. And as you can listen in this episode, I'm not very serious, right? But you kind of came hard with this one line and it doesn't seem to go perfectly with the rest of the book in terms of tone. And maybe we should soften that or remove it. And I was like, okay, if it came off harshly, then it came off the right way because that's the way I wanted it to be. And so the line was, so a lot of times people want to have that badge of ally or advocate or something like that, right? And so you have to ask yourself whether or not you're truly being an ally or you just want to call yourself an ally to reap the rewards of the social benefits of that title. And so we had a little bit of back and forth and it stayed in there, but most of the other edits, I was like, yeah, Leah, you're right on that. But I pushed back on that. So I want to now, after the fact, I want to get your opinion on that specific edit because that was one that I fought for.
No, I'm glad you did. And I agree 100% with the sentiment. My kind of approach is always like, okay, here's the goal, right? Here's the goals we've talked about for the book. Here's the approach, I'm going to take. So part of my job is reminding you of that in places where I think that you might have kind of, potentially forgotten. But in this case, it was an intentional choice. It was you making an intentional choice to step out of the approach that you've been using and that kind of lighter hand. So just making sure that it's intentional on your part, that's great. I've done my job. I have made sure I brought it up, and your job is to make that final decision. Is this the right thing to have in there? And I think it's a great line. And the fact that I have forgotten this conversation entirely should tell you that I think it was a great choice, and I'm 100% behind.
Okay, cool. Okay, good. The other thing I wanted to talk about was what became chapter 1, because the original chapter 1 was respectfully removed, and I thought that was a good call after the fact. And then we had to create a new chapter 1. And so for me, as somebody who loves negotiation, conflict resolution, you probably recognized a little bit of impatience when it came to getting to that. I'm like, I wanted to start off with, hey, I'm Kwame, negotiation tactic. And you're like, wait, some nuance, some introduction here. I was like, but we have an introduction. That's what the introduction is for. Like, no, we have to ease people in. And so what ended up happening was, like, the tactical and strategic advice started to move further back, but we laid an important foundation there too. And so again, now I shared like my feelings going into it. I want to get a perspective on you when you were having that conversation with me. What was going through your mind?
Yeah. So I think, like I said, it's something that we do with a lot of authors, is having to kind of take a step back at the beginning of a book. And I think it has to do with the whole curse of knowledge concept we were talking about earlier, is that authors are like, I have all this knowledge, I'm ready to impart it. And sometimes you have to step in and be like, okay, wait, except, that's great. Let's take a step back. Let's look at what does the reader need to, know in order to really appreciate this information. What mindset do we want them to be in? What should they be thinking about before they get to this, to make sure that they are in the most receptive, potential place to get this information. So I remember that happening, but honestly, it is so frequent of a thing. If I had to make my top 10 things that I do in editing, that would definitely make the top 5 easily.
Wow. Okay. So this is so interesting. This is very interesting, because for me, like, that was really hard, because with chapter 1, essentially it was, why should we have these conversations? And in my mind, I was like, what do you mean why? Leah, they got the book. If they made it to chapter 1, don't they already know this? And I really believe it ended up being one of the most important chapters. But for me, it was exceptionally difficult. Like, I think when it came to talking about the tactics and strategies, that just flows. That's easy. I mean, the tactics, strategies, all that stuff, that was the first part of the book that I wrote. That was the easiest part. But like, I was lost for a while with chapter 1, because it was almost something that I never once considered. It's kind of like if somebody it's like if somebody were to ask me, well, why do you brush your teeth in the morning? I'm like, where do I even start with that answer? This needs to be addressed, So for me, with that chapter, it took me a long time, and I remember the due date was like coming up, and I was asking a ton of people, like, why do we have these conversations? What's the answer to you? And it took me a really long time, and I think one of the things that I like about persuasion, conflict resolution, communication in general, is that even if you are not the person who is creating the answer, you can be the person who is providing the pathway for the answer to be created. And so, thinking about Socrates, the Socratic method, asking a lot of questions, I believe it was Socrates, one of his nicknames was the midwife of ideas, where he wasn't often creating the ideas, but he was asking the questions that helped other people give birth to great ideas. And you and the team really were the catalyst for the creation of chapter 1 in its entirety. Not only the fact that it had to be created, but also what went into it was critical. But I struggled with it mightily, couldn't have done it without those conversations that we had.
So first of all, I'm adding midwife of ideas to all of my editorial business cards going forward. I love that. That nickname. Sorry, Socrates. I'm stealing that. Second, I think in your case, I think it was a more difficult chapter than usual, even because of the audiences that you're trying to reach and they're trying to straddle. That's, I think, what made that chapter 1 so hard, because you are trying to reach both the person who is really motivated to have these conversations and the people who, they're reading it because they don't want to be having these conversations. They're reading it because maybe they are in a company and they have been given this book and told to read it. You have to, I think it was important to get those people on board without losing the people who are there intentionally and know they're ready to go and maybe would have been ready to jump right into those tactics. And so I think that's a tough set of people to make sure that you're speaking to, although, I don't think it hurts to remind that second group of all the reasons, behind having that conversation, because I think obviously having conversations about race, speaking of emotional conversations, is an emotional thing. And there's a lot of different reasons to have them. And I think getting a chance to, in that first chapter, understand other people's reasons of having them too, I think is a really good foundation for all the tactics that you talk about in the rest of the book.
I appreciate that. And yes, now that you say that, that is one of the biggest things that made it so tough for me to write that, because I had to think about the people that I was asking. So if I think about people who are like experts in diversity, equity, and inclusion, they're going to have a very passionate response like, oh, it's obvious for these types of reasons that are deeply aligned with my values that I just assume are correct. And then for other people, like you ask them and they might be trying to avoid the conversation. They're like, I don't know. I don't know why we need to have these conversations. And so it was really tough for me because I don't want to obviously pander to one side or the other. I want to make sure that this book is focused on the skills. And that's something I talked about in the introduction, where I said, I don't want people to read this book for me to tell you how to think about race. I want you to read this book to understand how to talk about race, but laying that foundation in a way that wouldn't be triggering or, isolating for anybody in that chapter was really, really, really tough. But, we got through it. And I think we laid the foundation really, really well there too.
Yeah, I think the thing that I best remember from the answers that you came up with when I was like, can you tell us why we want to have these conversations? And that I think really did a lot to address the kind of dangers of being kind of isolating or triggering is the idea that, we have these conversations because we care about other people. We care about the people we work with. We care about our family. We care about the people we engage with. And having that as a foundation for the whole rest of the book, that one of your motivations is to show care and to demonstrate care and to kind of build that relationship, I think ended up being such an integral part of that first chapter and also of the whole book. So it is flooding back to me now as we discuss it. And I just remember, how hard that was, but then how thrilled I was with what came back in that section. I thought it was a really, really great answer to, kind of the questions Alan and I posed.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. And I think one cool way to wrap this up is to talk about trigger words. Trigger words. And so when you think about the term triggering, this is something that evokes an emotional response that's really strong. And so in these difficult conversations, whatever it happens to be, you want to try your best to avoid trigger words. And sometimes it's not always obvious what the trigger word would be. So for instance, for me as a lawyer, if I'm negotiating with the other side and I think they did something that was wrong, they're going to be very like the word fault or liability is probably going to be triggering to them. Right. And so I'm going to try to avoid that as much as possible as I'm negotiating settlement. because I want to get them to talk about a solution without getting fixated on saying, no, it wasn't my fault. It's like, okay, all right, let's circumvent that. Let's just talk about how you're going to pay my client. But when it comes to this book, there was a specific word that was not a trigger word for me before, but subsequently became a trigger word. Do you remember what that word was?
Oh,
it starts
God.
with an E. Starts with an E.
Is it explicit?
Oh, you're close. You got the second letter. EX.
Oh, because I know what you're talking about, because it's something that I say in comments all the time, and it sounds like I should probably back off on occasionally. Okay, tell me.
You want me to tell you? So it's EX.
Yes.
All right. That's okay. So the word is exoskeleton. I'm just kidding. It's example.
Oh,
Can you
example.
give me an example? And so, listeners, in this book, you will see so many examples. And I want to tell you that 90% of those examples were not there. And so I would say something that made complete sense to me. And Leah and Alan would say, this is intriguing. Not exactly sure what you mean. Can you give an example? And, the first few times I thought that was cute. I was like, great. Examples are nice. I can give you an example here. And then it happened 85 million more times.
The other E word that I use a lot is explicit. Like, can you be more like, you've left this implicit? Can you be more explicit about that? And so I'm glad to hear that is not one that has kind of caused a problem for you. But I could, if you talk to some of my other authors, I'm sure they'd be like, can she stop saying specify? Can she stop saying explicit? I think it's all in that kind of example sort of area.
Yes, I'll be honest. I'll be honest with you, Leah. There were some times where I had to kind of like walk away from it, because sometimes my response would be like, you know what, we can remove this section. I do not want to come up with another example here, but
I respect it. It's part of the process, man. Yeah. I mean, because I know that my job is to ask obnoxious questions. Sometimes that is how I describe editing, is the job of asking obnoxious questions. And I understand that it is a great emotional lift on my author's part to answer those. But, if all goes well, at the end, they're like, I'm glad I did it. I'm glad the book that has resulted is better. If that's not the case, then I've messed something up along the way. But hopefully, and I've found at least that has been the case so far. And if it hasn't been for other books, they haven't told me. So
no, it made it better. And I think that was one of those things. It was almost like I felt like a kid whose parent told them to do the right thing. Where after the fact, I was like, pouting and everything. I was like, it's better, but I won't admit it. But I think that was it was very helpful. And I think, again, when we're talking about how to have these conversations, there are a lot of things that are theoretical that I think a lot of experts just leave in the theoretical world because it's easier. I mean, that's why I left it out. Because it would be hard to give a really detailed example. It's challenging. And I think with the podcast too, that's something that's feedback that we got, because sometimes people would early on in the podcast, they would say, hey, Kwame, this is great content, but sometimes I try to use the techniques, but it doesn't work the first time or I reach resistance. What happens in that case? So that's why we started to do the sparring sessions where we have the practice rounds where I try to be absolutely obnoxious and then the guest has to deal with me. And so I'm not doing that to you, Leah, because you've already been through that. So we won't do that. But I think it's really important to have those examples so people can actually see what it looks like in practice.
That's what I love about the appendix to the book. It is exactly that.
Exactly. You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. And then last thing too, when we think about, again, the word that we talked about in chapter 1, which is care, I think, and you tell me if I'm wrong on this, I think sometimes it might be surprising what authors care about in the process and what they don't seem to care about. Am I right on that?
I think that's true, but I think it's also really individual for each author. There's some authors who are very obsessed with where their commas go, and others that are like, I don't know, throw in whatever punctuation you think best. There's some authors who are who the cover, takes up a lot of their brain space. There are other authors who are like, colors look nice. You guys are the experts. All good. There's some authors who, I mentioned paper type before. There's some authors who come in and they're like, I need to talk about paper first thing. I really want this to be a 55-pound, white, and excited to have that conversation. But other authors are like, I have no idea what you're talking about. Is there print? Like, is it a physical page? I'm good. I'm good to go. So it is very, very individual. And there are other in editing, there are some authors where they're like, if my idea is there, if you think that sentence needs to be rewritten, rewrite it. There's some other authors who the exact wording is really important to them. And so part of it is figuring out what they care about up front so that, we can take care of them during the editorial process.
Yep. Makes a lot of sense. And again, just in difficult conversations in general, sometimes that's going to come up where it's like, oh, I didn't know that would be a big deal for you. Or, oh, yeah, that should be a big deal. I thought it should, but it's not. Very interesting. And so I think we have to shed those assumptions and be curious and ask those questions to figure it out. Because I know for me, I was thinking about making sure that the theory, the practical application, all of that was sound. I wanted to make sure that, with a topic as sensitive as this, I wanted to make sure that I was not triggering people without purpose. Because I told you, there's that one line where I'm like, oh, I'm trying to trigger people on that. I record scratch, pay attention. But that's at the end of the book. I've already built that trust, right? But leading into it, I needed to build that trust and be very mindful about the way that it could be perceived. But then on other things, for instance, with the cover, I was pretty chill on the cover because your designers are, I don't have an artistic eye, so I was pretty relaxed on it. I didn't mention this to you, but when we had the color options, I liked the color splatter on it. And then we had a white background, a black background, and then a bright yellow background. And so for me, I was like, ooh, that bright yellow looks kind of cool. Caribbean American, I like bright colors. That's really great. Do you know what killed that color for me?
I do not know, honestly. I get, some covers I'm more involved with than others. Here, I got to see an early round, and Alan and I kind of threw our comments at Sarah, and she took them and ran with them and then came to you with them. Yellow can be a really effective cover color because it's going to catch the eye. There's not a ton of books that are in yellow. But yeah, I'm now very curious. I'm totally going to go and email Sarah immediately after this to ask, but yeah, I don't know. I've got nothing for you.
Oh, you like this. I put a lot of thought into it. So I'm a proud Caribbean American, but I'm also a proud Buckeye, a 3-time graduate of The Ohio State University. And our rivals are Michigan University. And that yellow looked shockingly similar to their colors. And so when I shared...
We didn't want to go with that anyway.
when I shared it with one of my friends, they're like, that's Michigan colors. I'm like, we're not doing that. Hey, people in Michigan, buy the book. But I'm not going to promote yellow on the cover of this book. So besides that, I didn't really care that much. But then we talked about like the descriptions on the back, those type of things. One thing that I was a bit of that was a bit, I don't want to say diva-ish, but I wanted to do that was a bit outside the box was we had my picture on the cover, but then I wanted to push to have my family portrait on there too. And let me put a little line there for a shout out to say Whitney, Kai, and Dominic too. And I remember there wasn't, I wouldn't say there was resistance, but there was a note that was made by somebody on the team like, hey, that's unorthodox. And I'm like, I like
that. Was definitely my first thought when I came in. I was like, that's unorthodox. All right. It's a great photo. Your family's awesome. It's always lovely to see it on Instagram too. Definitely recommend use an Instagram follow for sure for anyone listening. I'm doing my best. I'm trying to.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And Leah, that's really the only reason people follow me. I've come to that conclusion. Sometimes I would put a really thoughtful post and I'd post it on Instagram and it's on LinkedIn and it gets a ton of shares, a ton of engagement and everything like that. And then I take that same really thoughtful negotiation focused post and I post it and it gets 3 likes and 1 comment from Whitney that says, cool. People don't care about me on Instagram. I post one picture of like Dominic struggling to walk, and people are like, "Oh my gosh, that's amazing! I need to follow this."
That's what I followed for. I followed originally for the baby pictures. I can't lie. I was like, baby pictures sold.
I know, it's crazy, but listen. These kids are expensive. They need to earn that money back from me. Put them on this book. Sell me these books. And we'll put it in your college fund. So, and I love my family. So that's the real reason I put them on the cover. Yes. Of course. No, this is great. And this is also officially the longest podcast interview. But
it's been great. It's been so great to get a chance to talk to you and catch up, since it's been a while since I was bedeviling you with all of my various editorial questions.
Yes. And it's great to have you. And it's great to get to like laugh and joke about the process now that we have officially made it to the other side. And listeners, you are going to get sick of me promoting this book, but this is what I need to do. So How to Have Difficult Conversations About Race. If you want to check out the finished product, now that you know what went into it, a little bit about what it went into it. If you're curious, check out the link in the description below. The book comes out September 13th, but pre-orders are preferred. So make sure you check that out. And yeah, I will catch y'all in the next episode. Congratulations, you've just joined an elite club. By listening to a full episode, you're now officially on the Negotiate Anything team. So welcome aboard. What most team members do is they subscribe to the podcast because that allows them to automatically get the latest episodes of the show. The best things in life lie on the other side of difficult conversations. Keep learning, keep practicing, and keep getting better. Your relationships will improve, your career will soar, and you'll have the confidence you need to get the most out of these crucial conversations. Again, thank you for joining the team. We're excited to have you, and I will see you in the next episode. I'll catch you later.